They were very good friends of others and fathers. Everybody played bridge. It was a great bridge playing community. Mrs. Bonney, Mrs. Fraser Bonney was my favorite human being that lived on the beach, including my own family. She was the daughter of General William and Mrs. Haldeman. She married to a man named Fraser Bonney, and she was one of the most marvelous people I've ever known. She was, of course, ages older than I, but she was very handsome and more fun than anybody in the world. She was one of those women, and there are very few of them, that men adored. They just adored her. They stuck to her like fleas. And also women liked her. Now, usually women that had attract as much masculine attention as Mrs. Bonney did are anathema to the ladies. But the women liked her. They liked her a lot. She had a great booming laugh. You could hear it all the way to the pier. She was a whale of a poker player. She beat all the men playing poker. She loved to drink and did that better than most of the men. Probably because she had a hell of a lot of practice. But everybody loved her. She was full of fun. She always had a pleasant word, a kind word. And she had a monkey named Methuselah that she let the kids play with. He lived in a big tree that was in their backyard, which was sort of garden backyard. And she had a big macaw, a great, big, beautiful macaw, that sat on her shoulder. And he sat there for years. None of the rest of us dared to go in there because he would bite. He finally bit her. And so after that, he sat on a perch. But it was just a fascinating house. I loved to be allowed to take messages down to the William Haldermans, because then I got an excuse to play with Methuselah and look at the big macaw and talk to Miss Clara Bonney, who really was one of the great characters of Naples. I came down here to study for my final exams at Bryn Mawr in 1934, which was a considerable time later. She was still down here, and I took her fishing one day. And she said, when I asked her, she said, I'd love to go fishing. You know, I hate to fish, and I don't like the sun. I never get in the sun, and I hate to fish. I said, well, then it's an ideal thing for you to do, to come out with me and be in the sun all day and fish. I think I've come up with the invitation of the year. But she said, no, I don't mind at all. She arrived to go fishing, done up like she was going out to be a beekeeper. She had a huge big hat on and veils all around her. And she came out, and we had martinis for lunch, and she had a whale of a good time. I had more martinis than fish for the day, and I remember that as one of the best days of my life. I had a wonderful. It didn't work out quite as planned, but it certainly worked out fine. There was no question about that. We fished out of the back bay in those days, where there was just one dock, and you went out with a guide, and there were many of them here. I remember the Storer family. Hub Storer was the youngest, and then there was Wes, and then there was the older one, George. And then there was Lee Parker, and there were a whole lot of others. And they used to sit in the hotel on the bench by the registration desk looking for work every night at dinner time. And people that wanted to go fishing the next day stopped and spoke to them, and away they went. And you'll be comforted to know, those of you who are now paying what you're paying to fish, that boats and the guide cost $15 a day. So I haven't fished much lately, because I'd have to sell the farm to go out in the day. And I can imagine if you spent the money you have to spend a day to get a guide, if you didn't get a top one, I'd shoot somebody. But anyway, that was how we went fishing. We went out in the morning, and the hotel made a box lunch for us, and we got one for the guide. Went down to the back bay and piled all the gear on, and off we went fishing for the day. They were always single-engine boats. The engine was right in the middle of the boat. They never really worked very well, the engines. They made a lot of noise. And you went out. They always worked going out fishing. They always worked on the way out. It was on the way back when there would be a suspicious rattle and a couple of coughs. And the guide would say, don't worry, everything's fine. And then it would die. And then he'd fuss with it and pour more gasoline in it, and you always thought they were going to blow up, and then eventually they'd take off again, and home we'd come. When I came down to fish later on in the 30s, when I had some time to myself from the horses, I came down with a friend of mine, and we took Hub Storer out with a boat of his. I think it was George's boat. And we went down all the way to Key West, and then came up the other side to Miami. And the day we started to go, Hub was told, I called him up and told him a dozen times we were coming, and I'd have all the fishing tackle, and he should have the rest of it. That's only he, because I had a lot of fishing tackle. I had a couple of Baumhoff reels that I valued beyond life. And we got down here, and Hub picked us up here at the hotel. We got halfway to the dock, and Hub said, I got to stop at the hardware store. I said, what have you forgotten now? Well, he said, my gaff's gone. The last people I took out lost it over the side of the boat. I've got to get a gaff. So we stopped, we got the gaff. We got down to get in the boat, and Hub said, just a minute, I'll be back in just a little while. I have to go somewhere. It seems that he'd forgotten the bait. So he went off and got the mullet, and he came back. And we started off. And he said, I sure hope that old tender is still down there at Shark River, because I didn't fill her all up with gas. I figured it would be down there, but I thought coming down here this morning that I thought I remembered maybe that she'd gone to the hospital and they didn't have that tender no more. And I thought to myself, this is going to be a swell trip. This is going to be fine. But that was the way you went. And Florence and I referred to going out with Hub. We went fishing in hubs and starters. Fits and starters. And Hub, they were wonderful men and wonderful guys, but they were not really very businesslike. They had a good time, and everybody going out with them had a good time. I had an awfully good time going out with them when I was in college, coming down here, because I didn't have all the money in the world. I was on an allowance, and I wanted to go fishing. So I solved it by going on their boats as crew for them, and they took out large parties of amply bosomed ladies and quite elderly, powerfully rich men on fishing expeditions. They had no idea what they were doing, and not the slightest idea. And they couldn't bait a hook, and they were terrified. The lady was always terrified of anything that would put on a hook. And the man, if you were unfortunate enough that he cast anywhere near you, you lost a head or a ear. I've been hit up the side of a head by a mullet so many times that it's a wonder my brain isn't somewhat addled, because and they hurt, they swing all those things and bang. And the man would say, excuse me, son, and on we go. Well, I went on these fishing expeditions wearing a Princeton beer suit. And the beer suits from Princeton you got from your Princeton bows, if you had them. It was a great honor. It was kind of like the class ring when they gave you their beer suit. And they were old-fashioned white painter's suits with just nothing but overalls and a jacket, and then they had their club insignia on the pocket. Well, that was more fun than wearing a tiara. I mean, if you had a beer suit from Princeton, you were in. And I used to wear my beer suit on these expeditions, and of course everybody called me boy. And I did a lot of things for a lot of people that I didn't think I should do. I thought they were going to kill themselves, but I went right ahead and did it. And I got a lot of tips, all of which I accepted, and said thank you. And they were they were wonderful people. They were fun. They were fine fun. They talked in front of me as though they were in front of someone who didn't exist. And I would listen to these conversations of these ladies and gentlemen and think, my. Do people live differently than my family does? I didn't realize all these things went on. And one time we went out with Wes Storter. And Wes, as you probably know, had at one time been in bad trouble running aliens. In those days, there were no drugs. Nobody worried about drugs. There weren't any. Nobody had anything to do with them. There was some bootlegging because, of course, Prohibition was on in the 1920s and didn't go off till 32. And there was some rum running, but mostly the bad days were all in aliens. And the aliens were poor Chinese that paid their life savings and got as far as Cuba, and then were taken up off the boat, their boats that brought them over from China and Cuba, and put on a small boat like Wes's boat, or brought in out to the 12-mile limit and put on a small boat, brought into Marco and told that Miami was 2 miles that way. And in those days, you couldn't get off Marco Island. I mean, once those poor Chinese were on Marco Island and they had no money, it was not a very pretty picture. I mean, they should not have done it, but they did it all the time. And the immigration authorities caught on to it, began to get very tough, and they put an end to it. But one of the people they caught in their net was poor Wes.